All right, greetings, friends. It's good to have you with us once again for our Monday night open forum. Just good to take this time out and visit with you who communicate with us through this particular medium with your questions, comments, and your sharings. And want to remind you that these sessions are being brought to you through the facilities of the Midwest Center for Truth here in Northwest Arkansas. These sessions are a ministry of the CMI Bible Research Center located here on these grounds and a production of CMI Audio Video Network System, being brought to you on the internet through Ustream and YouTube. So we're glad to be with you. In reference to a request that we had from a brother, just mentioning that a group that my wife and I meet with are starting the book of Galatians. If you know of a good resource for that book, please let me know. Well, do we know a good resource for that book?
Probably not.
After reading that note, I sat down and looked at a lot of the resources that we have, the different books that we have in the library, all of which have, a lot of information in them. But they seem to handle that letter of Paul's like they handle everything else from the standpoint of a religious belief, a religious doctrine. Martin Luther's book handled it from the standpoint of trying to prove a case against Catholicism, the papal Catholicism of his day. What I know this brother is looking for, and what we are all looking for who have a desire in our heart to know Him, we're looking for Christ. And in all the Scripture, and particularly the epistles of Paul. And by that I don't mean that that's above and beyond any other Scripture. I just mean that Paul's heart was set on seeing Christ. And it was Paul who not only did, but declared what he was doing as the preaching of Christ. So we thought that we would just, for a period of time, however the Lord allows us to continue it in our hearts, just look at different things in the book of Galatians. And we're doing this on the basis of several sessions, and when I say several, I'm talking about 80 some odd, 89, a lot of sessions, teaching sessions, that Rabin Bird did on the book of Galatians, beginning with chapter 1, verse 1, and going all the way through Paul's letter to the Galatians. And you will find that on our website, and in all honesty, that would be the best resource that I could recommend to the book of Galatians. Rabin did this over a period of, I don't know, maybe 2 years, 3 years. It was a long period of time, and it was a tremendous study. We shared about it a great deal. He shared it in his teaching and preaching and so forth. But we talked about it, we shared about it because, of the subject matter that you come to in that small letter, relatively small, but because of who it was written to, the circumstances under which it was written, Paul really doubled down with the Galatians concerning the reality of Christ. He doubled down on it more, in my opinion, than in any other epistle that he wrote, if you understand what I mean by double down. Like in one part of the thing, he said, if anybody, I don't care whether it's an angel, who it is, comes teaching you, trying to persuade you with any other gospel than that which we have preached, let them be accursed. Now, I call that doubling down. And you won't read that in any other epistle. Now, you will read about people who are trying to lead believers astray, and you will read about an evil, adulterous generation, but not like you do in Galatians. And we discussed last week why that was, at least what the situation was, and we'll look at it some more. But we're going to be looking at the book of Galatians. And just as the Lord directs our hearts and minds, we have a lot of publications here, and no doubt a lot of teaching here, that spend time with Scripture in the book of Galatians. But what I'm talking to you about as far as real research material is the study and the teaching that Rabin did on the book of Galatians. So, Jim, if you're picking this up on a Monday night open forum, if not, I'll get with you by phone call. I've been missing you each time I've called, but that would be a good resource that's readable. It's right there on the computer. You can print it out, do whatever you want to do with it. That would be a good resource. And then for a little period of time here, as long as we feel that we need to do it, we'll be looking at, and not only for you, not only for just the brother that wrote in this note, but for the Lord's body. So let's get started in our session today, and I'm going to ask Rabin to just lead us off here in some direction.
Well, I just really something you said last week. I flipped back through some of these notes that I had, and I come across a section, and you were talking about this Sunday too, about judgment, and the clarity of judgment is what I put over this section. Because last week you were talking about the, the demeanor of Paul writing this letter, and how he was very blunt with these people. And so much so, some people say very harsh, whatever. But, and it was very straightforward, very blunt. But what some people would go to and say anger because he was angry with what they were doing was not. It's not Paul angry with them because of what they're doing, going to the law. define righteousness. It was a man declaring or speaking out from a judgment that had taken place in his own heart.
Yeah.
And that judgment in Paul's heart had divided between light and dark, good, evil, life, death, flesh, spirit, all of those different distinctions. And he could not, in that light, permit. You can't keep people from going whatever direction, but he had to stand and declare the singleness of salvation to these people, the sufficiency of Christ himself, because he was declaring a judgment that was happening in his own heart to these people, because he's realized in that clarity that there's nothing else. Nothing else works. He's been on the other side. He's been under the law that they're now being told is the way. And he found it to not be. But he has now found the substance that that testimony testified of. And he can't allow anything to be brought upon that one eternal foundation that is not Christ himself. And, that to me is really the basis for him writing all of this. Yeah. A judgment in his own heart that motivated everything he did. It wasn't, I don't want you to follow these people. I want you to follow me. That's not even in the, he didn't care. The fact is, I want you to see reality and not be blinded to reality by the vanity of men's concepts and ideas. And the whole thrust of this letter was centered in the revelation of Jesus Christ, because he's telling them, this is where the gospel comes from that I declare to you. This is how I beheld the reality of all things, is God revealed his Son in me. Because a teaching and believing even what Paul himself taught can leave room for all the other stuff, for man's concepts, for other doctrinal ideas and theologies. But an encounter with the person of Christ can never do that. It brings a true judgment because it brings the clarity of one into the picture. And I always go back, it hit me one time with those on the road to Emmaus, when Jesus comes and joins them, and they're walking down the road and he's there with them, and he begins to talk to them, and it says that he began to expound to them the things of the scripture concerning himself. But it didn't change anything for them as far as his expounding to them those things. They were still as blind to who he was as they ever were. What changed their perspective to see him and know him was he broke the bread and their eyes were open. Their eyes were unveiled to see him, and then they knew.
Amen.
Just here, even Jesus, and not just Paul, even Jesus speaking to them didn't change anything as far as their comprehension of who he was in their midst. But a true encounter, an opening of the unveiling of the heart to see who this man is the only answer.
Amen.
And to me, that's what the whole theme of this letter is. Because he's bringing God's view of all things and how Christ is the summation of all of it. Showing them the true seed, showing them the intention of all of it, what the law was all about, why the law was instituted, everything. And saying, he needs to be known. This one needs to be revealed in you. He's in you, and salvation is there because he's there. Fullness is there because he's there. But you must see him, or you will live ignorant and be swayed here and there by every wind of doctrine and idea of men.
Amen. That's true. Let me see. Yeah. It's amazing. I guess maybe it's not amazing, but it's interesting. And when we come to do this open forum, most of the time, Raymond and I haven't said anything to each other, or very little. Now, there's other times that maybe we have, but this is one of those times we haven't. And before I ever got out of bed this morning, I was thinking about this class and the whole focus of it in my heart was upon the same thing Raven just said. It's a joy to me that we say the same thing. At the same time. The focus is on the person. And that was just hammering me. And, you try to do things. I'd written out, the one gospel, and then presenting the one life, one faith, one Son, one liberty, one, you can go through it in different ways. But, and while that is dealt with, one seed is dealt with, one faith, all of that. All of it with Paul comes it all finds its substance in the person of Christ. And I looked at that I had jotted down, and I thought, yeah, that's how religion would present it. We would have lessons on the one gospel, and only the natural mind knows what we would come up with. Mm-hmm. Everybody agreeing on doctrines. Right. And everything down through here. But to Paul, see, is exactly what Raven just said. The whole focus was upon the person of Christ Himself. It wasn't about different views of theology. You can read this letter, and I'll not attempt to say, but it's just exactly what Raven was talking about. That's exactly, and that's the thing that came to my heart, and it's something that I wanted to just point to, and it's here in this first chapter, and we read it and read it and read it and read it. But I took time, a day or two ago, to look at some commentaries and Bible scholars on this particular verse, and even some real good, what are normally good revisions, or that's not right either, but revised versions of different ones who have, done an exegesis of the Bible, but what they did, they just, it's a revision of the even the literal concordant translation. And it seems that verse 16 is what I'm looking at, because This may well be the heart of this whole letter, and no doubt is. As Rabin was talking about the judgment there, and that it wasn't Paul having a mean spell or a fit or being mad or all of this. And it certainly isn't. You know what this is? I'll come back to this in a second, because the thing was, it was one of the most personal letters that he ever wrote. Yeah. Now, his letter to Timothy was extremely personal. But this was an extremely personal letter where he details things that he didn't detail in any other letters. For instance, the revelation of Jesus Christ. Yeah. His whole certification. He didn't certify himself because somebody laid hands on me and declared me to be an apostle, and now I'm an apostle of God, pay attention to me. It wasn't about some official standing he had among brethren. Right. You know, I mean, it wasn't about, I'm the guy that brought you to the first time you ever heard about Jesus, or a lot of things where it could be where he would have been exalting himself in order to influence them. But he doesn't. The only certification he has, he says, I certify you, brethren, my gospel. The gospel that I preached. And even in verse 8, where he talks about an angel from heaven, but he says, but though we, I mean, if I come again, or anybody that works with me, or that travels with me, if we preach any other gospel, let him be accursed.
That's right.
And it's tremendously personal with him. But the thing that was really on my mind today was the person. To reveal his Son in me. And I couldn't believe some of the comments that I read by commentators and others on that. They just don't see it. Right. I started to write some of them down, and probably I should have, because they kind of get away from me. But it was like their commentaries on that was like that it was a revelation given of God concerning his Son, and upon that Paul based his Christian doctrine. And then it went from there, different versions of that. And some even mentioned, his doctrine of grace, his doctrine of this, his doctrine of that. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's not true. That isn't what this verse says. I even, I went back and looked at it in what we would deem to be if not an original translation, at least a translation in the original language. And it simply means exactly what it says. That the Father revealed in Paul the Son. The person. So that Paul saw everything from the viewpoint of the Father concerning his Son. The whole doctrine of God then became the Son. The completeness of the Son, the fullness of the Son, the Son. So it wasn't coming in Paul's heart from Judaism to Christianity at all. That wasn't the issue. Or from any other issues that you could bring up. Though he touches on circumcision, but he says neither circumcision nor uncircumcision. It's neither Jew, it's neither Gentile. And he finally comes down and says, and for that matter, it's not me either. I'm crucified with Christ. And you can never understand what he said next unless you have seen inwardly through the Father revealing him, unless you have seen inwardly the Son of God himself. You can never, ever understand the meaning of Christ liveth in me. You just can't do it. There's no way you can do it except that very Christ himself, the eternal Son, dwelling in you by the eternal Spirit. And he has appeared. The Father has revealed him, as if to say, behold the salvation of the Lord. Behold my Son. Behold my grace. Behold. Right on down the line. And it's all gathered up in him and who he is. Consequently, he said that you are so soon removed from him. And Rabin talked about this last week and discussed with you the two different meanings of another gospel, if you remember that. But the emphasis throughout this whole thing, and I was just reading it again this morning, is the person. Is the person. Everything of Paul's gospel flows out of his mouth as from one who is declaring the person that is revealed in him. And that's what he's doing here. Reveal his Son in me.
I think it's really important how he lays this out when in verse 14 he first addresses his life as a Jew, a zealous Jew. And the word in 15, but when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, to reveal his Son in me. There's so much in those words, because first he gives himself under the law, and then he's like, but here's where the pleasure of God was found. And it hit me one time when I was reading those and going through these classes with Galatians. It's almost as if, or not almost, it's him saying, all my time under the law, zealous as I was, give my life to it, I thought it was all gain. I thought God was pleased. There was not one moment in all of that that the pleasure of God was ever known, that God was ever pleased in any of it. And you go to verses like, he was never pleased in sacrifices and offering, he found no pleasure, and all of that. And this is really what he's going into here. The revealing of Christ, because there's an order here where it pleased God who had already separated me. He separated me from my mother's womb through calling me by his grace. That's new birth. That's being born again. The grace of God ushered him into something and thus separated him from something else. And the mother's womb there, we know, is debated all the time about, is it natural mother's womb or whatever. And there's no reason to go into a long deal about that, except just point them to the end of the chapter, and he's going to talk about two mothers.
Yeah, that's it.
And this one of those mothers he's separated from, named Hagar, which was the Judaism, and he's separated from that mother and brought into the true. And the grace of God did that. The grace of God bestowed all things, and now, in that bestowal of all things in grace, the pleasure of God is now finally being known. Mm-hmm. Not as Paul under law, not as Paul as perfectly obeying it, but as a son, the person. Where's the full pleasure of God? Where's the full bestowal of God's delight eternally? This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. There's the moment that God was able to share with the soul that was created for such a thing, to share with that soul his eternal pleasure. And that's his Son. And I think that's what Paul's saying. In all of these years trying to please God with works and efforts and zeal, it was that moment where the pleasure of God was finally revealed and made known. And I saw, because the word separated there means to be brought into boundaries or to be separated by boundaries. In fact, the grace of God brought him into the boundaries where all fullness dwells.
Yeah.
And now the unveiling of his soul to see that, to see the full bestowal and bounty of God in one man, in the Son of his love. I mean, that's a foundation to write this letter out of. That's what he means the gospel wasn't taught by men, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ. It wasn't that God revealed a bunch of better concepts. He showed his eternal thought and intention in a person. And he showed him that person. And so, it's hard. I mean, you could stay on these verses forever, because this is the true revealing that the soul is created for. Bestowed in grace, all fullness. And this is what he says in 1 Corinthians, right, chapter 2, that we've been given the Spirit that we may know what has been fully bestowed in grace. But this is the way you know what has been given. Because they've been called unto grace, and that's why he's saying in the first chapter, you have removed yourself from him that's called you in grace, called you by grace. And it's not that you have no longer are born again, it's that this is not happening. You are not seeing the one who is the grace fully given, or the gift of grace to the soul.
Amen. Well, we mentioned last week that they were, they brought in a mixture, and it doesn't make any difference what the mixture is.
Anything.
It could be anything other than Christ himself.
Yep, and that's why it's that I might preach him is the end of it.
Yeah, the person, the person, and as you read through Hebrews, Hebrews has a lot of the same, I don't know, maybe the same order. Seems like the same thought behind it that this letter does. There is this in Hebrews that is always contrasting everything, even those things, and mostly those things that were religious, those things that were of the law, those things that were given as a testimony of something, but in and of themselves fell short of that something, because they were a testimony that the Jews had taken and tried to make the substance of the matter, the substance of righteousness, rather than the testimony of righteousness. If we keep the law, we are righteous. And Paul saw, wait a minute, that's not right. It testifies of that which it cannot produce, cannot bring you to. It is the testimony, and it falls short of the substance, which is Christ. But my point is, it starts off the same way. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 and 2 starts off with the same idea or the same truth here. And it is just presenting Christ as the sum total of God's thought concerning anything. And you'll read there how that God in sundry times in diverse manners. Well, it was also God that gave the law. Wrote it on a rock at one time. However, God who did this at one time, in time past, by the prophets to the fathers, hath at the end of those days spoken in Son. And here we go on. Spoken in Son, which Son is the brightness of His glory, which Son is the expressed image of His person. Now, that's this one revealed in Paul. That's the Son who lives in you. That's the Son in whom you will find everything of spiritual life, everything of salvation, everything of God's plan, purpose, and as Rabin has just said, pleasure. And you will see it as being the Son Himself. You will not see it as being something He gives you, something He provides, a way by which you come to something else. No, you'll see that thing as Him. Because the cry of your heart may be, oh God, as was with Paul, show me your righteousness. What the Father will show you will open to the understanding of your soul, will unveil your heart to see inwardly, will be His Son. His Son will be the answer to your question on righteousness. Or whatever of the millions of questions there could be in your soul up against which you may have come. God's answer to it is His Son. And that's what Rabin is saying. It's what I'm saying. It's what we're saying here, hon. There is nothing else to preach. There's nothing else to teach except that Son. Anything else is something less than that is truly given of God, truly determined of God, truly a pleasure of God, truly a purpose of God. Anything less than the Son Himself, anything less than the soul that God created, and now the soul that God has redeemed, anything less than the soul, that soul seeing that Son, is less than the salvation of the Lord, than the Lord provided, that the Lord purposed, and with which, as Rabin has already said, with which the Lord is pleased.
I was reading one time where God speaks of Christ. I think it's on the mountain where this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. I looked the word up, and it says that it was the word pleased there doesn't just mean, I'm pleased with and delighted in.
Exactly.
But it's that to take delight in someone in that they fulfill your intention.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
And that's far. I mean, you were saying a while ago, when you talk about righteousness, God doesn't just show you things, He shows you His Son. And that's what Paul says in this letter. If the law, that was a testimony of Christ, could have given you righteousness and made you righteous, then righteousness would have been by the law. Yeah. But see, it couldn't, although it testified of the person and the life of that person, could not bestow that person to the soul, could make that person in you, to be in you, what it testified of. Only God could do that by grace. Only God could do that by new birth. And He will unveil the soul to that. And basically that's what He's doing. I had someone tell me, asked me one time, said, do you believe in replacement theology? And I'm sure everybody knows replacement theology is that, you said it earlier, it's not replacing Judaism with Christianity. Replacement theology is that the church basically took over where the Jews left off, so it's the church replaces the Jews. And I said, no, I don't believe in replacement theology, and they kind of looked shocked because of what we say. Well, they thought that meant replacement of the Jew, and I said, I don't believe in replacement theology, I believe in fulfillment theology. Because it was never about God putting away one group of people.
No, it wasn't.
And bringing in another group of people.
It wasn't.
And that's what Paul is saying here. You have these people who think seeds, because they're naturally born Jews, seeds as of many. And those are the sons of God, and they are the seed of God, and they are. And plurality is the thing. But Paul's saying, no, it's one. Amen. It's all about one seed. It's all about one Son. Not seeds as of many, but to thy seed who is Christ. Paul at one time was a part of that many that boasted in the fact that to them belonged all the things. And that's why the whole parables of Jesus about the Son, I'll send my Son, and they'll surely listen to Him. No, they kill Him because they want the inheritance. They want it. But they want something separate from the person that it was given to by the Father. And this is what he's saying. You can't receive anything of God separate from the person who is the heir of the Father.
Amen.
And that comprehension, that governing realization came when God revealed that one Son in him. And it brought it from seeds to seed, from righteousnesses to righteousness.
Amen. Amen. Well, blessed be the name of the Lord. If there is with you in your heart, in your soul, I don't know what to call it, maybe just a crying out. And it doesn't make any difference whether you understand it or not, but it's there, a crying out. Maybe it's a crying for more. Maybe it's a crying for righteousness, for wisdom. Maybe it's a crying out to know the will of God for your life. Whatever. I'm asking you, we are asking you, if that is seriously a cry in your soul, if you would take that before the Lord and just say, Father, I don't even understand what I'm crying out for here. It gets all jumbled up with my emotional state of being. I mean, at one time I'm crying about it, another time I'm, depressed about it, another time I don't know what to do about it, or the other time I'm trying to do something instead. Father, if all of this, if Christ is really the epitome, the substance, just open my eyes. Just give me, let it work in me, a spirit of wisdom and revelation. Father, deal with my heart in such a way that I am turned to see the Son. Father, reveal your Son in me. Because I'm sweetheart, there is nothing beyond seeing the Son, because there's nothing beyond the Son. There's nothing beyond this great Alpha and Omega. We have been given what only God, the eternal, everlasting Father, can give. And that is the one who is one with Him, His Son. One who is the glory of the Father, the Word of the Father, the image and expression of the Father, the love of the Father. But He has given us that in the Spirit of Christ, the indwelling Christ. When did He do that? When you were born from above. Raymond mentioned that a while ago. When you were born again. I think that in the ultimate intention of being born again is the open intention of being born again, the purpose of it, comes to what Rabin was saying a while ago, the Father fulfilling, finding, demonstrating His pleasure. To just say it simply, I believe that we're born again so that Christ can be revealed in us. I think it comes to that. All the separation from the mother's womb, my Lord, and the whole thing. Whether it's in type or shadow, the whole purpose of the whole journey of Israel is that in a testimony of Solomon and the temple, that at least there could be a testimony given of God of the supreme majesty of the eternal Son. Well, we've come to that reality, and Paul knew they'd all come to that reality. He knew he's trying to tell them you're not coming to a religion. You've come to you've come to the person. You've come to the one that everything you believe is fulfilled in. You've come to Him. It's just about Him. But that was the thing that was on our heart today. It was a thing that I was thinking about this morning when I woke up, just going through this, and it just centered there, and I thought, well, okay. And the scriptures that came to my mind with that was the same thing in Hebrews. At the end of those days, God has spoken about His Son. No, He haven't. That's His spoken in Son. And it is that brings the end of those days. Because when do those days end in my heart and end in your heart? When we see Him. Right. When we hear Him. All right, I don't know for sure what our time is. I'm going to let Rabin close us out on this.
Yeah, no, well, I think our time's about up, but you were saying a while ago that the intention of being born again, or the purpose, is to be Christ to be revealed. Jesus says that to Nicodemus.
Yeah, He did. He really did.
Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. And when I read that one time, I thought, that's the purpose of this. It's so clear there. If you're going to see this kingdom, you have to be born again, which means being born again, the purpose of it is to see the kingdom that is there by birth.
Yeah.
And that's basically, man, that's what this letter declares, as you were saying, that there is a salvation that God has given fully. But if you are not seeing the one who has been given, then you're going to seek the evidence or the whatever outward evidences of that salvation you think are valid. And people, just like the Jews did today, man, people will come from every direction trying to give you what that is and how to make it so. And it's so easy unless your heart is unveiled to and governed in that, what Brother Sparks calls the all-governing, dominating vision of God.
Yeah.
Unless your soul is governed with that vision, God's own vision, then you can be swayed in all of these directions.
You sure can.
But when your heart is set and the boundaries of the grace of God have been erected in seeing Him, then the one is all sufficient.
Amen. Yeah, and there's then just built in with that overwhelming realization that I'll be eternity.
That's right.
I mean, that this is not just a long, long time. This is, there's no end, hon. There's nothing to get bored with, because there is no end of this one whom we are seeing. And well, we might continue on. I wanted to, and we're out of time, I wanted to interject just a phrase that I wrote down, that which is perfect. Because I think that phrase takes us directly to Christ Himself. That which is perfect. That which is perfect, you could say about what? About anything and about everything. But we are talking about that realm wherein we can find perfection, and that's the realm of the Spirit. But if you found perfection there, what have you actually found? And it'd be better to say, who have you actually found? Anyway, the phrase that come to my mind, that which is perfect, it's in 1 Corinthians 3:13 and 8. And for some folks that gets a little touchy. But the term perfect there means something that is brought to its end, finished, wanting nothing, completeness, of full age. Now, darling, that is not me growing up. That is Christ Himself right now. Right now. He's already grown up. He's already complete. Do you understand? But it's when He is come, when He is the center of our view. Well, we can't go on into this. But to me, it's the same thing that, because it's Paul that's presenting this. He's seen, come on, hon. He has seen the perfection of salvation, and he wants to know Him in a perfect way, a fullness, a completeness. Because he has seen that his salvation is perfect. He's seen the one who it is. And now he wants to know Him. That is the automatic desire of a soul that has seen Christ. Oh my, I want to know Him. So I'm going to cut this off with that, but it's something to think about. So we're glad to be with you today. We appreciate you being here. Listen, if you've got any questions, anything to say about any of these sessions, this is the place to say it. This is the time to say it. Give us a call. Send us a letter. Send us an email, whatever. We're not here to argue with anybody over anything. By the grace of God, we're here to preach Christ and to preach Him as the Father is gracing our very souls in the revelation of Him. So may the Lord bless you. Let us hear from you. We'll just say amen.